Hello, all. Welcome to our Facebook Live event from TDI, Technical Diving International. My name is Jason Meany. I'm the Education Coordinator with TDI, SDI, all of international training. I have Mark Powell and Jeff Bozanic here, and we are going to continue on in our discussion about Trimix and open circuit versus closed circuit. I welcome you guys to go ahead and put comments in at the bottom. Just understand that if you are joining us from one of the other Facebook feeds other than TDI, we're not necessarily going to be able to see your comments. So go ahead and jump over to TDI if you want us to see your comments. Say hi, ask the questions you have, and we're going to continue on from there. But Mark Powell, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself real quick?
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Powell. I'm a rebreather instructor trainer. So I'm actively teaching a number of units, the Inspiration, the JJ, and the XCCR at diver and instructor level. And I also work part-time for TDI HQ as well, assisting the various regions and instructors, primarily in the Europe, Middle East area.
Beautiful. All right, Jeff, why don't you go ahead and give yourself a little introduction also, please?
My name is Jeff Bozanic. I've been diving rebreather since 1988. I'm the author of the textbook Mastering Rebreathers, which has been through 2 editions at this point in time. I am very active in recreational diving instruction and scientific diving as well. In fact, a significant portion of my rebreather diving has been on scientific projects, literally all around the world. And bottom line is I enjoy diving regardless whether it's open circuit or closed circuit. And I think it's something that, I love introducing other people to as well.
Beautiful. And we've talked about it, and we were talking about it last time. There's places for open circuit and places for closed circuit. And one of the big things that was a reoccurring topic as we were going through was essentially, if you get trained up through open circuit, how does that translate into closed circuit? Mark, what's your opinions on open circuit versus closed circuit and kind of the pathway you need to go?
So, some of the basics, some of the theory is going to be the same. Dalton's triangle is the same, whether you're on open circuit or on a rebreather. How to use a decompression trapeze and the teamwork required to deploy a decompression trapeze, or clip on or off that. All of that is common. The advantages of helium are common to open circuit and rebreather. So there's a large amount of overlap, but I think the big difference is the what you do when there's a problem. That emergency procedure, that what kicks in, what does the muscle memory tell you to do when there's a problem? And I think that's the big difference. So I think there's some big overlaps, and I'm still a fan of progressing a certain way on open circuit down the tech route before switching over to a rebreather. I think certainly advanced nitrox and deco is a no-brainer. If you want to dive a rebreather because you want to do deeper Trimix diving, then starting off advanced nitrox and deco on open circuit and then switching, I think still makes it a huge amount of sense. Going on to Trimix, then I think that's where it's a little bit more open-ended. And advanced Trimix, I tell my students, if you want to go to a rebreather, don't bother doing advanced Trimix open circuit. Use that time and money and build up that muscle memory on the rebreather.
Right, so that's about your threshold is Trimix, and then once they're going further than that, advanced Trimix, just switch over to the rebreather at that point in time. Is that correct? Yeah.
If that's the way you want to go, and not everyone does, So if you think, I just want to do that a little bit deeper, 150 foot, 45 meter diving, then start on open circuit and see how you get on with that, and then switch when you're ready. But there are people that know that they want to go all the way, and so I think that advanced nitrox and deco Trimix is the sort of the cutoff point.
Beautiful. Jeff, your thoughts there on training for open circuit to get into the closed circuit kind of area?
I agree with Mark in as much as, when you start to get to the rebreather side of things, that muscle memory becomes really important. And unlike Mark, I actually would recommend, if you know that that's the direction that you want to go, actually switching over sooner. In fact, in my opinion, if you know that you want to do deep trimix type of work, or you know that you're going to be doing technical diving where you're penetrating wrecks or caves, because to me it's pretty similar, then the sooner you switch over to the technology of using rebreathers, the better your muscle memory is going to be. And there's really two issues that I talk about when I look at, should I switch or should I stay with where I'm at? And that is, if you know that that's where you're going to go, if you train and spend a significant amount of time as an open circuit diver first, you've got two things working against you with rebreathers. One is the muscle memory that Mark talked about. And in fact, one of the students that I had the most difficult time training to use rebreathers at all was a person who had 8,000 hours of open circuit dive time. She was flawless as an open circuit diver, but her patterning was such that every time she went to do an emergency drill and she wasn't thinking about it, she fell back onto her open circuit habits, because that's what her muscle memory was built on. And it took a long time to break that. We did 24 dives before we certified her, just because of that issue.
So it's an interesting argument on both sides, right? In one aspect, you have the idea of when it's all going to go wrong, then you're going to be on open circuit. But then on the flip side, you've got this concept of, like you guys were talking about, muscle memory and which direction do you go? And we see this, Mark, you and I talked about the neutral buoyancy teaching, and we've talked about that when the muscle memory of that, when things go wrong, you're going to go back to that muscle memory situation. So that presents some very interesting arguments in both directions. Mark, do you have any responses to that? Not to get into to butting heads in any way, shape, or form, but any responses to the stuff that Jeff said? Because he got to respond to you. So
well, I think it just goes to show that there's not always any simple answers. As Jeff was talking just then, I was nodding away, thinking, yep, that makes perfect sense. So I think one of the points I'd make there is that when you're thinking of switching, talk to an instructor and tell them what is your experience, what is your plan, because I think depending on the situation you're in, we might make different recommendations. In the situation that Jeff was talking about, yeah, I think that's absolutely the right call. So I think that, there isn't one size fits all for everyone is probably the easiest answer. I think one of the areas that this gets a little bit difficult in, and one of the things that scares me, and I said, you've got the people that definitely want to go all the way, and sometimes it's that speed that worries me a little bit. So sometimes getting people to slow down a little bit and doing some more dives on open circuit before they go on is one of the reasons I think about getting people to do open circuit, a little bit more open circuit diving first. Again, you've got to set that against, though, if I can slow them down, then slowing them down by getting them to do more rebreather diving in the shallow water area before going on to doing rebreather diving in deeper water is probably the best use of time. So I think, come up with a training plan with an instructor that knows what you're trying to achieve and knows your strengths and weaknesses is probably the best advice you can give anyone.
And that brings back that whole idea of like interviewing your instructor, making sure you develop an education plan, making sure you're on both the same pages, and really developing that and figuring out if it's the right direction you want to go. Jeff, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
I was going to say, I agree with Mark in terms of everybody's an individual and you've got to look at what they want to do. But Mark, you also touched on just lightly the second disadvantage I see of having a lot of open circuit time before you dive rebreathers. I mentioned the first one was the muscle memory. The second one's a little bit more difficult to define, but what it amounts to is that when you're learning to dive open circuit, when you first started diving and you went to go, let's say your first 40-meter dive, you were terrified. It was dark, it was cold, there were all kinds of red lights flashing in front of you that said, I shouldn't really be here yet. You know, the first time you went into a wreck or a cave, the same thing happened. You go in a little ways, you get around the corner, it's like, oh my God, I can't see the entrance anymore. There's red lights that are flashing everywhere saying, warning, Will Robinson, warning. And that goes away when you've got hundreds of hours on open circuit and you switch to a rebreather. Yeah, your first 5 hours are going to be uncomfortable, and then your next 10 hours are going to be kind of so-so. But after that, it's like, this feels fine. And you're going to want to go exactly to where you used to be before. You touched on it when you said people want to progress too quickly. And if you've got lots of open circuit time and you're really comfortable in the environments that you've been diving in, you think you're fine on the rebreather. And it's really hard to slow yourself down because all those warnings that you got before, because you were pushing new frontiers for yourself, you weren't really comfortable. You knew that inside, but you don't feel that anymore. And so people that have lots of open circuit experience do a dozen dives on a rebreather and they say, oh, I'm ready to go to 100 meters now. And they're just not. And they're not because of the muscle memory. They're not because they don't know the responses. They're not because they don't recognize problems before they become full-fledged emergencies. But as long as everything is going fine, they feel fine. And that's just not true when you're learning to dive initially. So in my mind, if you get them before they have hundreds of hours in open circuit and they know they want to go that direction, they don't push themselves as quickly. And it comes back to what you say. You want to keep them in shallow water first. You want them to have 75 or 100 or 150 hours before they start doing this advanced stuff. But they don't want to, if you've got a lot of experience, it's really difficult. They hate doing that because they feel bored because they know the environment already.
Yeah, exactly. And they're often the ones that then get into trouble and get the problems, and they're the ones that become the accident statistics. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. It's that Dunning-Kruger thing, and you're even compounding it by giving them a false sense of security going into it. So those are really good points, which brings up the idea of how quickly, if somebody is truly qualified in, say, Trimix or advanced Trimix, how quickly can they, well, everybody's different, but how quickly should they expect, or would they think that they can move through the CCR realm? Jeff, why don't you go ahead and start, since we had Mark start last time?
As a gut level feel, you generally tell people try to get 100 hours on the rebreather before you start doing advanced environments. It's a nice, easy number, and by that amount of time, usually you've seen the common problems that'll come up several times, and you will learn to recognize them in advance. And if it takes you a year to get to 100 hours, great. If it takes you 5 months to get to 100 hours, great. If it takes you 2 years, but at least gives them a threshold to say, I should have this much experience. And the reality is that's kind of the amount of experience I look for when people come to talk to me about taking open circuit Trimixes. I want them to have a significant amount of open circuit, easier environmental experience before they start pushing on into more ostensibly hazardous environments.
Nice. Mark?
I think that 100 hours is a sensible ballpark. I'm not a big fan. I hear some instructors say, "Oh, you'll need to take a year away to build up your experience again." Well, that's fine if, as Jeff said, you're doing 100 dives in that year. But if you're only diving once every other weekend and you end up doing 30 dives in a year, then a year is not enough. So I think it's the amount of experience that is important. And again, I'd say 100 is about right as a minimum. I think the other thing as well, though, is it's not just quantity; it's quality of experience. Mm-hmm. If you just jump in and swim around and do nothing other than just swim, you'll get plenty of experience of how to dive the rebreather when everything is going well. And one of the problems I think with modern rebreathers is they're just too reliable. They work too well. You can potentially, depending on the unit you dive, you can potentially do 100 hours and not get any problems with the unit. So I think it's about doing that time, but also practicing the skills. I see it on a regular basis. People come back to me for Trimix or mixed gas courses, and I ask them when the last time they practiced these skills, and they'll look sheepish and admit that it was on their previous course. well, I know that they've now got no chance of performing those skills on the course, but also if it happens for real. I've seen numerous people completely lose their buoyancy control on a bailout descent because they haven't practiced it. They don't realize or they don't remember the details of doing a bailout descent. So yeah, it's not just how many hours do you need to do, but how many times you need to practice this? How many hours do you need to have flown the unit manually? How many bailouts from depth do you need to have done before you get to that point? But yeah, certainly people underestimate how confident they or underestimate how much they know the unit. And I think Jeff's point about the red flashing lights and the being scared because you're beyond your comfort zone. Unfortunately, I think advanced Trimix open circuit divers get back into what they think is their comfort zone quite quickly, sooner than they really should be, until the red lights are real red lights and a problem's occurring, and then they quickly realize they're not in their comfort zone. So yeah, I think 100 hours. It's a very long way of saying I agree entirely with Jeff. 100 hours is a very sensible metric to aim for.
Yeah, I mean it's 100 hours, but we've talked about this a bunch of different times. It's come up of, are you doing one dive 100 times, or are you doing 100 different dives, which you're talking about varied environments? It's so hard to regulate that or suggest that to people. And some places, even doing the same dive 5 or 6 times is different, different currents and different visibilities. And you could dive the same wreck 10 times and it could be completely different dives or you could dive one that every single time it's basically the same. And like I said, with Mark, what you said with the rebreathers, like a lot of them are so great that I had well over 100 hours by the time I had even the slightest bit of an issue with my unit. That's it. Like, okay, like you don't get that practice, you don't get that feedback. Mike threw a comment up. Let's throw Mike's comment. If when going straight to rebreather route, do you find students need remedial work when it comes to open circuit bailout? So, Mark, you had just put it up there, just talking about doing bailout drills. So what's your thought on that?
So with this, and again, this comes back to this question of where do they spend their time? And, the argument about, doing open circuit first is that they get this open circuit practice, which comes in when they need to do a bailout. And I don't agree with that at all. Because if they go rebreather first and they're practicing, well, that's when they get the practice of open circuit bailout. Because actually, and I think I hinted at it before, a lot of open circuit divers think that going back onto open circuit bailing out is then back to what they know, and it isn't. You're not going back onto open circuit. You're going onto bailout with, in some cases, a partially working rebreather still on your back. So I think the best way to learn open circuit bailout is to do open circuit bailout, not open circuit, because that's not the same. Open circuit bailout means bailing out from a rebreather. They don't need remedial work. They need to learn that, and they need to build up the experience and the practice, and they need to get good at bailing out. And until they can bail out effortlessly without thinking about it from 30 meters, then I'm not going to take them any deeper and start to do decompression bailouts or Trimix bailouts.
Yep. And Jeff, I would agree with that, and that goes along with a number of different skills. I mean, it's bailout, it's flying a unit manually, it's learning how to dive a unit with water in the breathing loop. Those are all skills that really need to be comfortable with in order to be an adequately safe advanced mixed gas diver in the stuff that we're doing. And you don't get those things without practicing. It used to be that you got a lot of practice in that stuff with rebreathers every dive you went on, because every dive I dove on a rebreather, when I had early rebreathers, they all leaked. They all had electronics problems that forced you to go to bailout on a regular basis, and none of that stuff happens anymore. And so you actually have to consciously make a decision. I'm going to practice these skills.
Yeah, and I think that's a missing component in a lot of people's dive profiles and plans, and going forward as they're going into these advanced gases. I think Mark, you had mentioned it, of saying, okay, I've got 100 hours in the units. Well, how many times did you practice bailing out? Well, never. I never had to. Like, no, did you practice at all? Did you do any of these skills since you left? Have you done a dill flush? Have you even done a limit check at all? Like, what is your dive profiles like? And that changes everything. And then you start looking at the OC people that are coming through the CCR, where they're going, okay, well, I've done this. And like you guys were saying, I've been comfortable. This is just like the way it was. And then when it all goes pear-shaped, there's a whole lot of extra stuff involved. And it's not just, you've got a loop in front of your face or above your head, and then can you stay on the rebreather? Is there a way for you to be on the rebreather and stay on it and minimize that? So, Jeff, are there any situations where you would say bailing out, but also utilizing the rebreather, and how would that be different on closed circuit Trimix?
Oh, there's lots of examples of that. I mean, it's like I'll give you an easy one. You lose your electronics. You do a bailout getting all the way back up to 6 meters or 20 feet. And now you can go back on your rebreather after an oxygen flush and use it for the rest of your decompression and save all of your open circuit gas, and still keep your PO2 high enough to be able to effectively off-gas the inert gases that you have in. So the electronics might not be working, but that doesn't mean that the rebreather is not functional for that portion of the dive, which you don't need electronics for.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mark, thoughts on that?
We can come up with lots of examples of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Mark?
I think, it all comes back to if in doubt, bail out. And I think that's such a powerful statement, because when you start off as a new rebreather diver and those red lights go flashing, you're in doubt. So bail out and come up. At the beginning, if you're not 100% sure and confident with what the problem is and how to solve it, bail out and come up. And if it's a no-stop dive, then that's very easy, straightforward. And then gradually, what will happen is that there will be less doubt. So you're in doubt a little bit less, to the point where, exactly as Jeff said, well, my rebreather is not working, except I know that I don't need my electronics in order to tell where I'm breathing at 6 meters. So as you progress down, and it fits in with the various training levels. I don't expect an Air Diluent 30-meter no-stop rebreather diver to be doing complex rebreather skills on day one. When that problem occurs on day one, if they can bail out and get to the surface, then great, they're safe. They can be on the surface, and 20 minutes later they can think, actually I could have dealt with that. Oh, yeah, maybe I'll try that next time. And then as you progress, by the time you get on to Air Diluent, Deco, Heliotrox level, I'm expecting them to be trying to solve the problems and then bailing out when they realize that actually, no, I don't know what's going on. By the time they get to mixed gas, they should be solving the problem and staying on the loop, unless it's a problem that they can't stay on the loop. And then, frankly, by the time you get to advanced mixed gas, it's very difficult to carry enough bailout to do that yourself. So it's working as a team, and the team mentality comes into play there. So yeah, I think if you just keep thinking if in doubt, bail out, and basically the level at which you're in doubt should gradually be stretching as your comfort zone stretches.
And that kind of comes back, Mark, to the question that we asked earlier. And there's another part that I wanted to raise to that, is how much time or when is it right to start to go on to advanced Trimix on rebreather? And you and I both agreed 100 hours ballpark is kind of okay, depending on who the person is. But it's complicated because the standards for the different training agencies are significantly less than that. Sometimes it's 10 hours or sometimes it's 25 hours. And so you have a potential student who comes to you and says, hey, I've got 24 and a half hours now. I'm ready to sign up for my advanced Trimix class. And I'm thinking, oh, please, no. Because they haven't had the chance to push those limits, become more comfortable with minor problems and come back to the surface and say, oh, I could have dealt with it this way. And then seen it happen another time and dealing with it that way. They just don't have enough hours for any of that to have occurred. And yet the training agencies suggest that that's an okay number. And so part of the process in working with a student is educating them as to why, those standards exist as a lowest common denominator, but the reality is that most people probably need a little bit more time and experience than that before going on or getting started down the advanced Trimix path. And that's an educational process that's incumbent upon the instructors to help the students understand.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and that's that's something that I know we spend some time with our instructors. Is teaching them how to use the standards, because we've already talked about it. 100 hours could be enough, or it could be not enough. If you've done 100 hours, and we didn't mention it before, but 100 hours in a quarry is not the same as 100 hours in the sea. The 100 hours it's a terrible metric in terms of judging experience. Time does not equal experience. Unfortunately, it's the best that we've got. And you could say you've got to do this type of dive and that type of dive and that type of dive. But again, if someone's done a lot of sea diving but no cave diving, does that make them a better or worse diver? So I think the key thing is the 100 hours or any standard based on hours is only part of it. The training agency's got to set the line somewhere, but it's up to the instructor then to look at those 100 hours and think, are they good quality hours? Is it just swimming around in a quarry for 100 hours doing absolutely no skills, or is it different situations, different environments, practicing different skills? A really useful one that I ask students to do is send me a copy of your logs, because that does a couple of things. One, I then get proof that they've to a certain extent, it's proof that they've done the number of hours. But also, it's interesting the number of students to say to me, "How do I do that? How do I download the logs from my Rebreather?" So it gives me an idea of just how familiar they are with all aspects of their Rebreather.
Absolutely. So Warren threw up, Warren Miller, the instructor's willingness to say you're not ready based on what they see, know of the diver is very important. It's super important. That is the basis of all of this. You need to look and assess your student and figure out where they're at, where they need to go, and what sort of education plan you need to develop for them. That is massive. Mark, thoughts on that?
I think I almost take a step backwards as well. One of the things I do with my students is give them a forward training plan. At the end of one course, I tell them, what I want to see before they come back for the next course. So, I don't like saying to someone, no, go away, you're not ready. I want to give them that plan in advance so they can work towards it. They can do the right sort of practice. So that they come back to me and go, right now, I think I'm ready. So they've got a good idea of what ready means. But if you've got a student that's come from a different instructor, you don't always have that luxury. So yeah, there are times when you have to just say, no, you're not ready. Or I want you to do these things before you are ready, and that is scary, especially for new instructors. Saying to someone, saying to a customer, "No, I'm not going to take your money," is scary. But I remember the first time as an instructor, I either turned a student away or failed them, and I'm thinking, oh, what have I done? I'm turning business away, or if I fail someone, they're not going to come back to me. And actually, what I found, complete opposite. The higher your standards, the better the reputation, the more people come to you, and so it's actually good for your business. High standards are good for business, especially at this level. There are other areas of the market where people will just compete on the cheapest. But when it comes to advanced mixed gas, you don't tend to get people asking who's the cheapest instructor for advanced mixed gas. So yeah, I think maintaining that standard is good for business for any new instructor.
And even more so than a business perspective, and that's important, Mark. But the reality is it's risk management. I don't need to have somebody get hurt when I'm trying to train them, and even more importantly, they don't want to get themselves hurt. It's not, it's people aren't getting into this because with the vision that they're going to die on their third dive. part of my job is to help people that don't have the judgment, that don't yet have the experience to have the judgment, develop that in a manner that doesn't put them at undue risk or in a position where they're seriously in jeopardy of losing their life or getting seriously injured. And business all aside, I'd much rather turn away a payment for a class if it prevents somebody from getting hurt that I see as really a safety issue.
Yeah, definitely. That is the utmost important. So let's kind of change gears here a little bit and kind of come back to our, we're starting to get into more of the training aspect. Let's talk about pros and cons for the different environments, open circuit versus closed circuit. Is there certain environments or certain situations, tool for the job, so to say, where we'll go with Jeff first, where you would prefer to use open circuit over rebreather? Is there any situation where you would?
I'm thinking about this. I mean,
good. I like it.
there are caves where I've been diving where we didn't actually know if there was going to be a cave there, and it was a 5-mile walk through the jungle before we ever got to where the hole was. And we opted to bring 2 4-liter cylinders, like 25 cubic foot or 26 cubic foot cylinders, because they weighed a lot less than what it would have taken to bring open circuit. And I'd much rather go in and see if something goes with lightweight gear than something that weighs a lot more. And, if I carried a rebreather and a bailout bottle and everything else that went in, and we get in there, and I mean, I've walked in 5 miles in places, which is 8 kilometers, to find out that the water was only 30 centimeters deep. That's the part of exploration is like that. So my mantra for real exploration for that kind of stuff is go with the lightest gear I can until I actually prove that I need more equipment.
Good. Mark? More, Jeff?
No, I was going to say the flip side is also true. If I know that something is going, I don't want to waste my time with open circuit if I know that the environment's going to mandate the use of closed circuit gear because of the amount of time or the amount of gas that I would need to have otherwise.
Yep. Mark, thoughts?
I think I'm struggling to think of somewhere where I would decide, open circuit was definitely the best option. I think the 2 situations I can think of is you're traveling, you're going somewhere where it's not going to be particularly deep. You know that you can get a standard scuba cylinder somewhere. A single cylinder wing and regulator for some dives like that. The very easy, shallow reef type diving, where the hassle of taking the rebreather halfway around the world for something where you don't really need it. I would probably leave the rebreather at home for that one. The other one, and I was going back and forth about whether I would or wouldn't, is sometimes when I'm doing net clearance or working dives, we're clearing nets off of wrecks in relatively shallow water, and there's a focus on the task. Maybe I'd prefer open circuit there. Although as I was sort of thinking about it, I'm thinking, but if anything goes wrong, I'd rather have the redundancy. So certainly for any type of exploration type diving, and the caveat on that, of course, is I don't do cave diving. So when I'm talking about exploration type diving, it's deeper wreck diving. Then it's rebreathers all the way for me.
Nice. So when you're talking Trimix versus Trimix, it is rebreather for you, Mark. Is that correct?
Yeah. If I'm doing if I'm putting Trimix in something, it's going to be a rebreather.
Okay. Same with you, Jeff. I feel that
I would agree as long as the rest of the infrastructure supports the rebreather use. I mean, I've been in places where you can't get oxygen. So having a rebreather there would be a silly thing to have because you just can't get the gas you need to support it. But presuming that the infrastructure exists for both, rebreathers, no question.
Yeah, and you've got time to deal with things. You got that luxury of time. You have to calibrate that into your bailout. But I've seen people that push things every once in a while, and you go, "This is exponential." Like this is you going a little further on a rebreather on Trimix doesn't mean your bailout is just a little bit more. It can be a lot more And I think a lot of people miss that. Well, not a lot. I hope not a lot, but you'll see people as they're pushing this going, yeah, I've experienced an open circuit, so I'm just going to go a little bit further because I've got the luxury of time. It's like, no, you just put yourself into an exponential potential world of hurt because your bailout just went through the roof. We do have one good question here. Would you prefer open circuit for dives where you expected to do a lot of hard work underwater? So would the task load change, or would the workload change for you, Jeff?
I don't like to work hard underwater ever. And so the reality is I modify what I'm doing so that I don't have to overexert myself. And about the only time that hasn't happened where that hasn't been true is when I'm working against a current in a cave. And the reality is I do prefer open circuit in those kinds of conditions. Or if I'm trying to wiggle through something really tight in a cave or a wreck, rebreathers tend to be bulkier. It's easier to fit through stuff in open circuit gear just because it's smaller. Yeah. But for the most part, I avoid hard work whenever possible.
Nice. Mark?
I'm lazy.
I like it. Mark, your
yeah, pretty much the same. Yeah, I think it's different if you're a commercial diver and you are, actually doing physical manual work underwater for an extended period of time. Then maybe a different answer. Although, at the same time, if you're doing extended manual work and breathing harder, then the gas volumes on a rebreather may actually still be an advantage. So, yeah, I think the assumption behind the question is if you're working hard and potentially over breathing the scrubber. But as Jeff said, I'd always try and avoid that. If by hard work you mean concentrating and you're focusing on something, so mentally hard, then that's a different set of challenges. And the temptation there is to get distracted from the rebreather. But there, I think that again that comes back to that comfort zone. You've got to be able to do whatever you're doing and still keep an eye on the rebreather in any situation.
Yeah, I think you made.
I was going to say if it's task loading we're worried about, that's an experience and training issue. And I have no problems dealing with that. And I do a lot of, in my scientific work, I've got lots and lots of different tasks going on at the same time. The rebreather is background noise in my mind, but it's so automatic that it's not an issue.
Yeah, and that gets into that physical versus mental. If you're mentally task loaded and working hard mentally, and you're not paying attention to your PO2s and what's going on with all of your different gases, then or you're not paying attention to your bailout might be bubbling or something like that, that's a completely different scenario that could put you into a really tough spot also.
Another potential environment that I would consider using open circuit instead of closed circuit are contaminated water environments. I've been in water environments that have lots of hydrogen sulfide, and I'm more comfortable with open circuit there because there's no chance of getting contaminants in the breathing loop that I'm breathing over and over again. I've been diving in waters that have fairly high levels of E. coli and sewage, and I prefer open circuit for those kinds of environments as well. The flip side is that I've been diving in environments that are completely unsuitable for open circuit that the rebreather worked out fine. I was doing some research work where we were diving in underwater, basically in quicksand underwater, where you went down into the water and the liquefied sand was such that you could still swim through it with difficulty. But when I came up from the dive, the sand was packed on my second stage of my regulator so much that it was like you poured water on beach sand. You couldn't have gotten another grain of sand on, and there's no way for the diaphragm on the second stage to move at all. Yeah. And the rebreather handled that pretty well because there's no parts that are moving external to the water column except for the counter lungs. Yeah. So there's that works in both directions, but it's more commonly that I would prefer to dive open circuit in contaminated water situations.
Interesting. So the classic elephant in the room. So we've talked about the fact that for pretty much all of us, healing it or with Trimix, the rebreather is kind of preferential. But you hear this, rebreathers are so dangerous, rebreathers are so dangerous, blah, 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 blah. Is CCR more dangerous than open circuit, Mark?
Yes and no. So I'm going to come at it the other way. I think a lot of the dives that we do on rebreathers are more dangerous than the dives that are done on a rebreather. You know, if you think about the sort of the almost the summary that we've had from this discussion, and you know, in the UK, I don't know if it's the same all around the world, but in the UK, nobody really does that much really deep open circuit diving anymore. So all the deep dives are on a rebreather. So if we're doing all the dangerous dives on a rebreather, then that's going to have an impact. So I think in many ways it's the diving we're doing rather than the technology that we're using that's the driver. The other so that's the sort of the no part of my answer. The yes part, you know, the yes, rebreathers are more dangerous if you don't pay attention. And so, you know, it's, you know, are cars dangerous? Well, of course they're dangerous. You know, if you drive a car with your eyes closed, you are going to have a crash and you're going to potentially kill yourself and someone else. So what do? You don't drive with your eyes closed. If you drive a rebreather with your eyes closed, you're going to have a crash, and luckily you're only going to kill yourself, not someone else. And so, you know, I don't understand why people will you know, they think it's unacceptable to drive a car with their eyes closed, or with, you know, they know those brakes are faulty, they know there's nothing wrong, that there's no brake pads, they know that the brake line is frayed on their car. They're not going to drive it. You know, that would be stupid. And yet people jump in and they ignore their rebreather. They jump in with known faulty pieces of equipment, and then they're surprised that they have an accident. So, you know, I think it's this. It's not so much the rebreather; it's the culture of people that are diving the rebreathers. Sometimes that is the dangerous bit.
And I agree with Mark. It's both yes and no. The reality is scuba diving is dangerous. As much as we try to tell people it's not, it's a family sport, blah, 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 scuba diving is a dangerous activity. When we dive open circuit, there's several ways that we can easily kill ourselves. We can run out of gas underwater, we can embolize, we can get decompression sickness and die or get paralyzed from that. We can marine life injuries. That's why we go through training, is that we learn how to avoid those situations and how to manage them. We're reducing the risk to an acceptable level. When we add nitrox into that equation, we've added another way of killing ourselves. We've added hyperoxia, you know, oxygen toxicity. We learn how to manage that. When we go decompression diving, we've added another risk factor. When we add rebreathers, we add a couple of risk factors. We now add hypoxia and caustic cocktail. But that's why we have training. You know, we learn how to mitigate, how to recognize and mitigate those risks to lower the risk levels to an acceptable level. So do I think that rebreathers are more dangerous than open circuit? Yes. Do I think that we cannot manage the risks appropriately? Not at all. You know, I wouldn't have taught my kids to dive rebreathers if I thought that we couldn't mitigate the risk to an appropriate level. And that's why we have training programs. That's why we have standards, and that's why we want people to have experience.
Yep. And like we said, the technology has come a pretty darn far way overall. The concepts are still the same, but the reliability of the units is much better than what it used to be. And a lot of that stuff, as this industry has, is leftover stuff that just keeps getting passed on and passed on and passed on. And that becomes a major part of it, and scare tactics and things of that nature. And it's just, there should be a healthy fear of them, right? You should have a general healthy fear that to get those red lights to click on, that you're going, maybe I shouldn't be doing this right now. Maybe I should wait a little bit for that. I'd rather have you come a little bit scared to me for a rebreather than all gung-ho, like I'm just going to take this down to wherever I was on open circuit, like next week. Like that, no, like slow down. So you should have a healthy fear, but I think there's a little bit extra bottled up fear. We have a lot of long comments, so I'm going to pick and choose some instead of putting them up on the screen, or parts of them. Talking about the open circuit versus closed circuit and comfort with actually being able to cross or to bail out, and talking about bailout drills and practicing bailout. Do you feel that people that have open circuit experience, especially in the Trimix area, have a quicker response to bailout or a slower response, or is it not even a thing in any way, shape, or form? Do they just feel more confident being on open circuit and quicker to get there? Mark, does that make sense what I was saying?
Yeah, it does, but I don't think it is a thing. In fact, one of the things that I sometimes struggle with experienced open circuit divers coming on to a rebreather is that a bailout is not a gas switch. When you are doing that initial bailout, when you realize that the gas that you're breathing in the loop is no longer safe, it's there's a problem for whatever reason, you're not doing a gas switch, you're doing a bailout. And so the criteria is very different. When you're doing a gas switch on open circuit, you're breathing a perfectly safe gas. You could stay on your back gas for the next hour or so with no problems whatsoever. So it's all about making sure that you're switching to the right deco gas. And there's a procedure for doing that. When you're switching to a bailout gas, the gas you're breathing is not safe. You can't stay on it. You've got to get off it as quickly as possible. And so it is not the same as a gas switch. Now, you've still got to be able to do that safely. And so there's different ways that we can manage that. Bailout valves, bailout regs around the neck, whole range of other things that we can do. But it isn't a gas switch. So a gas switch experience is not necessarily the same. Now, if you're doing multiple cylinders, switching off your bottom bailout onto your second or your third bailout, your deco bailout, that is a gas switch, and that is the same process. But yeah, I don't think gas switching experience is necessarily particularly useful for dealing with the bailout.
All right. Jeff?
I basically agree with Mark. I don't see a significant difference between someone who has a lot of open circuit experience and someone who doesn't in terms of bailing out, because I expect anyone at that level to have enough bailout experience to be able to be comfortable in switching over. So I don't see a difference.
Nice. Good. One of the things I wanted to come back to a little bit, and we've been talking a lot about it, and down in my notes here is, and we talked about it previously, but I wanted to hit on it again. Is Trimix worth the money? We're talking about all these things and all this stuff, and it seems very complicated, but people then go, is this all worth the money? Is this worth the hassle? Jeff, do you think Trimix is worth the money, and why?
It's like asking, are airbags worth the hassle? They're not worth the money until you're in an accident. And Trimix, is it worth the money? I did a lot of deep air diving. Not unlike Mark. Mark's done a lot of deep air diving too. And the reality is that we did a lot of dives, and when we went to Trimix, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I can actually remember what I saw now, or actually saw it for the first time because I was clear enough headed to be able to see it. Didn't stop me from doing the dives initially, but it's a much better experience, and it's probably a much safer experience because my responses are more timely, my responses are more considered, my responses are more appropriate for what the stimuli are.
Nice.
But until you've been there, that's hard to tell people that. So yeah, I think it's worth the money.
Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, as Jeff said, we've done those dives in the past, which is why we realize the advantages now. For me, I remember the first time after I did my initial Trimix training, I went back and I did a deep dive that I'd done on air previously, and I dived this wreck probably 5 or 6 times previously, and I went back, did it on Trimix, and all of a sudden I remembered more of that one dive than all of the others put together. And this is wrong. I was fairly skeptical about Trimix. I was one of these people who said I don't get narked. I've never tried to give my reg to a fish or any of those myths that we keep peddling. But what I realized is that I just wasn't remembering all the detail of the dives. So I was spending all that money, fuel for the car to get to the dive site, the boat, accommodation, spending all that money and not remembering the dive. So spending a little bit more in order to remember the dive actually seemed like a pretty good investment. And that's even before getting into what Jeff was talking about, is none of those dives went wrong. So I didn't need to be clear-headed in order to deal with the problem. If I had, it would have been even more of a value. So remembering the dive rather than forgetting it and being able to deal with the problem if it occurs, that's a pretty good investment as far as I'm concerned.
So now we've gone down this road. So talking from the Trimix perspective specifically, are rebreathers worth the money? Now that adds a ton of cost in there. You talk about the cost benefit analysis and the break even point. Everybody has all these questions. Some of those are so hard to calculate. It's not even really, it's a moot point, but are rebreathers inherently worth the money? And we'll go backwards. Go ahead, Mark.
Yes. It's a yes and a yes.
Just done. Yes.
So, for all of the discussions that we've just had about using Trimix, but also, if you come back to time, the deeper you go, the more advantage you've got in terms of time with a rebreather, both in terms of getting more time on the bottom, but also getting more time to solve a problem. I remember I was running an extended trip to Sri Lanka, diving HMS Hermes, and I dived my rebreather for the first 2.5 weeks, and one of my customers' units died, so I lent him my head and I did the dive on open circuit, and that was scary. That needle was dropping so quickly, and I'm thinking, right, how far away from the shot line am I? Because I've got to get back. I've got to have enough gas to get back. So that that being able to have almost infinite gas is a huge advantage for deeper dives. I always found that I couldn't really enjoy a dive because I was too busy looking at the needle, and I was too busy calculating how much gas I had left. On a rebreather, obviously you've still got to think about the deco and what if you bail out. But that advantage of having that additional gas source makes the dives more feasible and more enjoyable for me.
Good. Jeff?
I'm going to say it depends. Open circuit is a tool, rebreathers are a tool. And what Mark said, if you're going to do a lot of this stuff, there's no question rebreathers make it worthwhile. But if you've got, I had one person who wanted to go see a wreck that was at 200 feet because his father died on the wreck. He wanted to go down and place an urn. It was the only Trimix dive he was ever going to do. It's stupid to buy a rebreather for that. It's stupid to get 100 hours of experience on that just to be able to go out and do that one dive. It's much quicker, much more cost effective, much more timely to say, build on the skills that you already have with open circuit and go do that dive then. But if you're going to make a habit or a practice or a lifelong avocation of doing advanced Trimix diving, in my mind, there's no question rebreathers are the way to go.
Excellent. All right. So I don't know if this one's going to be too long. I'm going to try and throw it up. Tom had an excellent question here. It's not bad. I'll bring it down in a second. What do you see as the next big advantage in CTR technology? I know this is kind of getting off topic, but we're going in that direction of CCRs being worth it. So do you think we're going to see solid state O2 sensors going forward, CO2 sensors that actually work? That would be amazing in humid environments. Where do you guys see the CCRs going and developing technology wise? Jeff.
Well, solid state, let me just not necessarily state solid state oxygen cells, but any gas monitoring cells at all can increase in reliability. That's something that I see as being beneficial. Scrubber technology, I don't think is particularly good. That has an opportunity to advance a lot. Underwater navigation systems that are built into the rebreather have a great deal of potential in terms of advancing where rebreathers are, because quite frankly, underwater navigation, especially for Trimix diving, where you don't, where in bad viz, if you can't find the shot line or the anchor line that goes back to the surface, that puts you in a world of hurt potentially.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't think about that because people don't think of navigation as being life support, but I do. I see it as being as important a part of what we're doing as bailout drills, for example. So those are three areas in particular that I see the possibility for major advances.
Nice. Mark?
I think the original questioner hit it on the head. I think, cells for me are the number one priority that we should be focusing on. We said earlier that yes, rebreather is dangerous. If you look at the problems that we have, they're usually around cells of some description, either O2 cells or CO2 problem. If we could get rid of having to work out whether our cells are reading correctly, if we could be absolutely sure that those cells were going to work properly, that would take a whole lot of concerns away. And then CO2 as well. CO2, I think, in reality, is a much lower priority than O2. But being able to have a working CO2 sensor, so you could just rely on it. And if it says there's no CO2, there's no CO2. And if it says there is, there is. I think that would sort of take things forward in terms of reliability, but also confidence in the units as well. And I'd like to see additional standardization. Maybe standardization is not quite the word, but some agreement on getting things consistent, at least between units, so that it's a little bit easier to switch between units. That might be optimistic, given that different phone producers can't even agree on the charging cables for their mobile phones. But yeah, I think that will be a nice step to make it easier for end users.
We did it with railroads. Maybe we can do it with CCRs. I mean,
we do it with open circuit. I think we ought to be able to do it with CCRs.
That's a good point. Yeah. All right. Well, that puts us like right at 2 hours. I had some other stuff, some other hornet's nests I was going to poke, but I think that would end up making us go like an hour and a half to 2 hours. So we would basically capable of coming back and hitting some things later on if we want to. There are a lot of great comments in the comment section. So gentlemen, if you would kind of pop in there at some point in time in the next few days and answer some of the questions, especially some of the longer ones we couldn't put up on the screen, that would be amazing. But I sincerely thank you for your time. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us. It's been a blast. Any closing remarks, Mark?
Just that, rebreathers, I think generally are the future. And if you dive it safely, then it is perfectly safe.
Good.
Well, I want to say thank you for having us on. Thank you, TDI, for putting the series on. I think it's a great series for divers to listen to. Thanks for inviting us all to participate today. I think I always have a good time talking with people like Mark and Jason and other peers because it's valuable to be able to share viewpoints and opinions and discuss pros and cons. And most importantly, I hope all of you have learned something out there and go forth and practice diving in a manner that is beneficial for the whole community. Stay safe, have a good time, and pay attention to what it is you're doing.
Thank you. Again, thank you guys. And we're going to go ahead and sign off now and feel free to throw up some more things in the comments and we'll get in there and start answering them when we can. All right, guys. Thank you very much. Talk to you in a minute. Bye.